So since I built the Electric Cub some time ago, I've been really itching to build another wood kit. And something I've been really meaning to build for years, decades even, is one of these. The QT. This one is kitted by Airtronics. This came out, I think, in the late 70s, originally in Radio Control Modeler magazine as a plans feature, and then eventually it was kitted by Airtronics into this really nice kit. I've always wanted one since I was a teenager, and I never had a chance to get one. And this box is actually just a placebo. I found it, a friend of mine said, hey, I got this QT. And I jumped on the opportunity to get it, and it was just a box of random wood. There's no plans, there's no QT in it. I think the QT has been long since built and crashed and whatever. So, but I had this neat box of wood. But the QT is a really neat little design. It's really meant as a sort of a trainer kind of plane, but it was meant, of course, to fly on one of these. 049. And that was, of course, pretty much standard for a small plane like that back in the 70s and 80s. And I think I will actually build it with an 049. Just for some nostalgia, I guess, instead of going electric, even though I'm primarily an electric guy. But in this case, I actually have an option because originally I said, hey, I got this old 049, an old Cox 049, I think not a Black Widow, but something like that, yeah, it works. It still works, I'm pretty sure. I'll fire it up sometime later and test it out. But then I came across one of these at a swap meet. This is a Norvell 061. And this also has a throttle and a carburetor. So I thought, wow, this is really neat. Maybe I'll run this. This is new in the box. As far as I know, this has never been run. And so this would be fantastic. So I'm kind of at a quandary. I haven't decided yet which one I'll go with, but that's something we'll revisit later. So one of the interesting things about this design is it's a really neat parasol wing. It should be really easy to fly, super easy to build. But for me, the design of it, this is actually more of a scratch build project than a kit, because I had to download the plans from online. There's a place online that has old PDF of plans from years and years ago. And since I really were starting from scratch, I decided that I would take the plans and move them into a CAD program, trace over them, and vectorize them. That is, turn them into a vector diagram instead of a raster. And once that was done, I have access to a laser cutter through a couple of organizations I belong to. One of them is a makerspace type organization, which has a 40-watt laser. And so using the laser cutter, I was able to cut out my own parts with the laser cutter. So I basically made my own kit. So I've got firewalls, I've got ribs for the wings. I did all kinds of stuff. I even went a little further and traced out and cut things that normally weren't done in the original kit, such as the tail and some of the fuselage sides, which you usually just would cut with a razor blade. I decided, hey, I'm going to laser cut them. So I thought this was a great process to go from the actual drawing, creating a vectorized drawing, laser cutting it, and now we're going to see how well my drawings went and how well I cut out the kit. And we're going to start building.
So I needed to import the plans into a CAD program since the plans were not in a vector format. The CAD program allows me to trace over the plans, which will give me a vector style copy. Once I'm done tracing over the parts, I can then simply export the drawing into a standard file format for the laser cutter. With the files ready for lasering, it was off to my local makerspace to do some cutting. There we have a 50-watt laser, which should cut the balsa parts like butter. A couple of button presses to select the files, and we're off. As you can see, the laser cuts quite fast. Even 1/16 inch plywood parts can be cut relatively quickly. Although I didn't use the right power and speed settings for the plywood at first. As an experiment, I even laser cut the tail parts. I was able to acquire some original plans from a friend. The question now is how well my custom parts will match up. Let's start with the fuselage sides. Turns out they matched up perfectly. The laser cutter was too small to make one long fuselage piece, so I needed to glue two small pieces together. Next was gluing in the wing struts, which I made copy marks for the other fuselage half. Onto the plywood fuselage formers, which I properly cut out this time. A right angle tool keeps everything straight. Time Time to mate the other side. Then join the tail together. Make sure our sides are evenly curved. Banana-shaped fuselages don't fly well. Add in the real turtle deck formers. Then glue on and blend the front deck with a little bit of sanding. Lightweight semi-flexible control rod is used for the tail controls. Just snake it in, then secure with CA glue. Bend the landing gear into shape using the plans as a guide. Make some holes for the lashing string. I didn't use a drill at first. Yeah, that hurt. Much better. I used some old spider wire I had laying around. Thread it through the holes around the gear a bunch of times, then secure with generous amounts of super glue. Now throw on some bottom sheeting and blend in with more sanding. The nose fairings were also laser cut, which needed an angle sanded into them before gluing together. Yep, more sanding.
So as I was in the process of gluing on the nose pieces, I thought I was doing a really good job of it. I was quite impressed with myself. Then I realized, oh, wait a minute. I forgot to put the front sheeting in front of the landing gear because I was going to use plywood or something harder than regular balsa wood, because that's what the plans call for. And I said, okay, well, I'll go with what they want. And I said, well, I'll do it later. Well, I forgot. I just left it open. I put this on, and I realized, oh, wait a minute. If I put the sheet on, there's going to be a lip right here, because I made this flush with the bottom, so I kind of forgot. So that's my first kind of semi-boo-boo. It won't, of course, won't affect the way it flies. It's merely just cosmetic. So what I think I'll do is I'll use some of this basswood here. I'll put some, this is kind of a hardwood. I'll stick that on the front and probably just make it up with a little thin sheet of 16th inch balsa wood and just kind of fair it over, and nobody be any wiser, except for you, the viewers. So, a little minor hiccup, but hey, that's part of scratch building. You make boo-boos and you just work it out and move on. But other than that, it's actually going pretty good. The fuselage is fairly well done. I still need to do the cross braces for the top, but not much else. Maybe it's the little braces for the servos. But I think this will be ready for covering actually very soon. In fact, I expect to do that in the next day or two. So for tonight, I will just finish sanding and I'll put this on and I will call it the night.
At this point, I attached the remaining parts of the wing mount. Enough with the fuselage. I want to get to these gloriously cut wing ribs. Throw down the leading edge and half wing spar. Slide on a wing rib, add glue, and repeat till done. Lastly, add on a trailing edge. Wait, something's not right.
So I'm making pretty good progress on the wing, but when I went to do the trailing edge, I noticed that the trailing edge triangle stock is basically shaped like a banana. I don't know how I didn't notice this before, but it's really out of whack. I don't know if you can see this in the camera very well, but it's pretty bad. So it's pretty much unusable. And it's the only one I have, so I'm gonna have to go back to the hobby store and see if they have something that's a lot less banana shaped. And so we're gonna have to stop work on the wing for now. But I consider a pretty good night because the wing is starting to get together and looking pretty good. So I'm feeling pretty confident I can get this thing done in the next couple of weeks.
Pay more careful attention at the hobby shop. This time I found some straight wood to use. Much better. Add in a quarter gussets. Then finish off with the center sheeting. All done with the building board. Say goodbye to the wax paper. Now trim off the extra pieces. Sand everything flat. And then grab my trusty microplane and roughly shape the wing leading edge. Finally finishing off with some more sanding. Now I could finally cut the wing in half. Since the QT has no ailerons, it needs a specific amount of dihedral. So I carefully sand in a small angle on both wing halves. Then epoxy the wings together using random bits and tools to hold everything together while the glue cured. The finished structure is pretty strong. When assembling the tail parts, I noticed the nicely laser cut strings were very weak. So I replaced them with hard balsa. Oh well, it was worth a try. This is where it really started to look like an airplane. Alright, no more excuses, time to cover this thing. Looking through my boxo covering, I decided on simply white and red monocoat. Yep, I like to live on the wild side. As a test, I covered the rear deck first. The rather old monocoat stuck just fine. While I was at it, I covered the tail parts as well. Before I could cover the wing, I wanted to fiberglass the center section for extra strength. I mixed 2-part finishing resin, thinned slightly with denatured alcohol. Then brushed it on under and over the cloth. The top and bottom of the wing was done. This will definitely prevent any unwanted wing failures. While I was at it, I used the epoxy to fuel-proof the engine compartment and wing struts. 049 spit fuel all over the place, so we need to use protection. When dry, trim the cloth flush and more, yeah, you get it. Oh yeah, now we get to cover it. I always like to start with the bottom of the wing first. Compound curves on the wingtips can be a bit tricky, so pull and heat, pull and heat. Then on to the top. Some red bars to break things up. Then carefully shrink the covering with a heat gun. At this point, I remembered I needed to finish the fuselage. The elevator and rudder hinges are the CA type. Before gluing on the tail, I test fitted the wing. Then checked that the horizontal stab was level with the wing. Next was to ensure the tail was on straight. Mark the spot to remove the covering. And then glue on the tail with some slow setting epoxy. Gotta make sure everything is straight. Slap in the servos. Control horns, control rods with a Z-bend on one end, and finish up with my old friend, the Easy Connector.
Okay, so at this point, I'm really pretty much done with the airframe. I've covered it, installed the servos, control surfaces are hooked up. I just, of course, just need to put the wheels on, but that's, you know, a 30-second job. But for the most part, it's done. The wing has been covered and shrinked, and so at this point, I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, there's really not much I can do with it. So now comes to the engine. And of course, I think I mentioned before that I've decided to go with the old school 049 on this instead of electric, just to really to embellish the classicness of this design and really just go old school and just really fully embrace my early, how do you say, entry into the hobby with the 049 engines.
So how will this venture into nostalgia work out? Well, stay tuned for part 2 when we select a motor and try to commit flight.